is available the week of July 15th. To this point, on the subsequent invitation, we haven't heard back from Mr. Anderson, but the message that we heard from Mr. Anderson last week was that he felt it was short notice and that he was out of the country and that he would be available at some point in July. I'm not certain when that point might be, but it was at some point in July. So that's the status of where the invitations for the witnesses are right now. As I mentioned earlier, the committee did receive correspondence this morning. It was distributed after it was translated that Ms. Poon is available the week of July 15th. Still no indication about Mr. Anderson at this point, other than he is available in July. With respect to the phone records, the committee will recall that the motion did state within 7 days of the motion being adopted. This is the 7th day. And it certainly wasn't to the hour. So my expectation is that we are going to get phone records, which was requested by the committee, text messages, iMessages, instant messages, call logs, etc., by some point today. Now, this morning, the clerk has been in touch with representatives from the minister, and he expects that that will be available to the committee by later today. But we still have not heard anything from Mr. Anderson except for last week that he indicated that it should not be a problem for him to meet the request of the committee based on the motion that was passed. So, Madam Clerk, if I'm missing anything, I think that pretty much gets us up to date on where we are. So I certainly need some direction from committee where you want to go, given the information that we received this morning and the additional information that I've just given you. There were a lot, as I said, back and forth over the last week to try to accommodate the witnesses to appear today. So, Mr. Barrett, I saw your hand up first. Go ahead, please.
Chair, I'd like to move that pursuant to Standing Order 108-1A, the committee summons the following witnesses to appear before the committee for no less than 1 hour together on the week of July 15, 2024. Kirsten Poon of Navis Group and Stefan Anderson of Global Health Imports.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. The motion is in order. I've got Mr. Green on the motion. Did you want to say anything, or you just very quickly? Okay, go ahead,
Chair. Both witnesses, in your explanation this morning, we've learned that Mr. Anderson was not available until July, and Ms. Poon is available that week in July, and to be consistent with the initial motion that was passed by the committee not to relitigate the length of time, I think that both witnesses should appear for an hour independently of one another, an hour for Ms. Poon, an hour for Mr. Anderson. That was not the will of the committee at the previous meeting, so I'm not looking to relitigate that. But if the committee is, this is going to be our last substantive opportunity to plan to get some answers on this question, and having Ms. Poon and Mr. Anderson both have an obligation to appear that week, knowing that they both have July availability, when members' availability is going to be limited during the month of July, or not previously planned time in Ottawa. This is incredibly important to get answers that have been dogging this committee for weeks now. We need to find out who the other Randy is, what Minister Randy Boissonneau's involvement was with Global Health Imports while he was serving as a minister, and of course what his ongoing interests are with Navis Group, a lobbying firm that lobbied his government that he was receiving payments from while serving in cabinet. This is an opportunity to do that.
Okay, so I've started a list. I've got Mr. Green next.
Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, and then Ms. Damoff. Go ahead, Mr. Green, on the motion that Mr. Barrett just moved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly, members around the table are very well aware of my feelings about arbitrary meetings in non-sitting times. I would caveat it by saying that this isn't arbitrary, given the fact that Ms. Poon herself volunteered to be here on the 16th. Notwithstanding the fact that we have to respect that, I would ask, Mr. Chair, and I do seek that you're getting some direction from the clerk, but I'm unclear in the escalation of inviting witnesses, that a summons is particularly necessary. I know that it fits a certain dramatic theme in communications, but I think that given that they have not put in writing, or we have not received in writing a refusal, that they're volunteering to come here, I think the language of a summons, although may suit certain communication styles, isn't necessary. And so I'm wondering through you, Mr. Chair, to the mover of the motion, what the intention is of using the language of a summons. I'll say, like on the record, I believe that we have the power to summons anybody. But I do think it's a professional courtesy in working with witnesses to find an available time and escalate in a manner that is consistent with their agreement to participate. This witness has not refused to come to committee. So I'm just wondering if the mover of the motion would be open to and considering, just removing the term summons and continue with the language invite until such time as the witness decides that they're going to send us in writing a refusal.
Go ahead on the point of order, and I believe Mr. Green asked a question through the chair, and I do know that the clerk has some information that she would want to share with the committee. Go ahead on a point of order.
On a point of order, the motion that I moved is different than the motion that I provided in writing to the clerk that was circulated to members of the committee.
Okay.
In the motion that I've moved,
Yep. I
said, following the word together, the week of July 15th. Did I say 15th or 14th? Let me just check here. The week of July 15th, not on July 15th.
Okay.
So I wanted to provide that latitude, and then when the chair will allow, I'll respond to Mr. Green.
That was one of the things that the clerk had brought to my attention. So that we're clear, it's the week of July 15th. Monsieur Villemure, appel de règlement? Oui, okay. Alain?
Point d'ordre plutôt, parce que
A point of order, yes. The French and English versions are different. The French version is more similar to what Mr. Green stated. I think it's perhaps an alignment between the different versions. Perhaps the clerk can make corrections.
Mr. Fisher, are you looking to have the motion in front of you then, or is that what you'd like? Okay. Okay, just hang on a sec, okay? Here we go.
Thank you.
Okay, I am going to suspend for a couple of minutes so that the clerk can get the motion to members of the committee. So we are suspended. email with the motion has been sent in both languages to all members of the committee. Just a couple of things that I would note that need to be clarified within the motion. Somebody needs to put further to the motion that was passed. That needs to be added to this so that we are clear on the direction of the committee. And the other thing is the week of July 15th, I'm going to need a year because we all know that words matter. 2024 is the year we're in. And if we leave it open-ended, then it is open to interpretation. So I want to make sure that that's clarified. Mr. Green, when we left, you still had the floor, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. I want to make one note just as it relates to the spirit of the motion that was originally passed. You just stated that we need to add an amendment further to the motion that was passed. If you recall, I believe the motion that was passed suggested that the witnesses meet together. And so, like, for me, whether they're together, this says that as well? 1 hour together. Okay, good. So I will then move the following, that the words further to the motion that has passed been added, and that we delete summons and include invite, and that the year 2024 be added to the week of July 15th.
Okay, so Mr. Green is moving an amendment. I don't think I need to stop the meeting in order for that to be understood. And I appreciate you clarifying that, Mr. Green. Do you have any other comments on that, on your amendment? So we're on the amendment. I need a new list. I've got Ms. Damoff on the amendment. Go ahead, Ms. Damoff.
Thanks, Chair. Just a request, if the clerk is going to circulate emails to us, if we could get the full email chain, because we only see part of it. So if there is an email exchange between, that's being sent to us, I don't actually remember seeing those before, but if they are going to be sent, if we could just get the full email exchange as opposed to parts of it.
So is that on your iPhone, just so that I'm clear? You're referring to what you see on your iPhone?
I've seen it on my computer too. So it shows part of it, but
Okay.
we don't see if there's a response, or we don't see, like, just if we can, if we can just make sure we see everything.
Okay.
Chair, that's all.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Thank you.
So we're on the amendment here. Mr. Fisher on the amendment, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just further to what Pam said and towards the clerk through you, Mr. Chair. I did see some of that stuff too, but I didn't see the invite. I saw the responses. So I'm interested in when those invites were sent. And this speaks to Mr. Green's amendment to amend the motion to say invite, because it was really a week ago that we passed that motion. And I didn't see anything from what the clerk said that indicated that they were not willing or somewhat enthusiastic to come to committee. So I think that summons is a strong word, and I think it's probably a word that we may have to use someday. But I'd say in this situation, I agree with Mr. Green. But I'd be interested in when the invites were sent, what dates were offered, when did they respond? Was it immediate? Did the witnesses ever refuse or hesitate to appear? And what other dates have been offered since their response?
So I think I tried to clarify that at the beginning of the meeting. I actually turned to the clerk and asked if I had missed anything, and if she needed to fill in any of the gaps. So I mean, if you want the entire list of the invite and the correspondence back and forth, and I know the clerk. Do you want an email on that? Then,
Well,
or?
just to see the
Okay.
what
If
was
the
sent,
clerk is
what-
prepared to answer the question, she can go ahead. Go ahead, Madam Clerk, if
Okay.
you want. Yep.
Question is? When it was sent?
When the initial email was sent, when the responses came back, when the follow-up emails were sent.
Yep.
There,
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be read out now if you don't want to read it.
Okay. Well, I have no issue saying it. I touched base by phone in order to get the email address as soon as the motion was adopted, so within a few hours of the meeting being over. So that was July 11. And the two witnesses talked to me over the phone.
June 11th, just to be clear.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I said
that's okay.
July.
Yeah.
And then they gave me the email address, and I proceeded to send the invitation right away on the same day. So that was June 11. And then I did talk with some, and some came with the answer by email faster. And on this Friday, I sent a renewed invitation offering other dates. But I can prepare all that and send a distribution. Sure.
I'll support that amendment that Mr.
There was
Green.
also, there was some back and forth with legal counsel as well, representing the two witnesses as well. So we can include that in all of an email, if you like, okay? Okay, so on the amendment, I don't have any other discussion. Okay, on the amendment, do we have consensus on the amendment? No. We do not? Okay. So we will, we don't have consensus, we'll go to a vote on the amendment. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
So on the amendment from Mr. Green, everybody heard the term of the amendment? Good.
Should be clear.
Mr. Baines?
Yes.
Ms. Damoff?
Yes.
Mr. Fisher? Yes. Mr. Hauswater?
Yes.
Ms. Khalid? Yes. Mr. Barrett? Mr. Brock?
No.
Mr. Cooper? No. Monsieur Villemur?
Oui.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeas 7 pour 7, nays 3 contre 3.
Okay, so the amendment does carry, so we are on the main motion as amended. I had a list going on the main motion. Mr. Fisher, I think you were on the top of that. You want to cede your time? Okay. Anybody else? I had Ms. Damoff, and then I had Mr. Villemur. Are we good? Main motion as amended? Okay. So we are voting, well, we're not voting. Do we have consensus on the motion as amended? Yes. We do? No. We're going to we're going to call the vote. Go ahead, Madam Clerk, on the vote.
Mr. Baines?
Yes.
Ms. Damoff?
Yes.
Mr. Fisher?
Oui.
Mr. Hauswater?
Oui.
Ms. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Mr. Brock?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Monsieur Villemur?
Oui.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Madam Clerk?
10 yeas, oui, 10.
Okay, so that's unanimous. Motion passes as amended. For the sake, just let me, for the sake of the committee, week of July 15th, I'm going to shoot for July 16th on the Tuesday, just so that everybody's clear. Okay, those are the date. That's the date that I'm going to propose to the witnesses. Okay, so it falls falls within the scope of the motion, and I'll do it in the morning as well. Okay. Just to be clear, that's the offer that's going to go out. Mr. Green, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move a motion
Go ahead.
that notwithstanding the week of July 16th, as per the usual practice of the House of Commons, standing committees, that the Standing Committee for Ethics shall not meet during Parliament's summer recess unless the requirements of the 106.4 of the standing orders are met.
You said the week of July 16th. The 15th is the Monday. So, right? You
It
meant
doesn't even have to be in the motion. I'm just
Okay,
saying that
okay, all right.
I'm accepting that week because of the work we just did.
Okay. We're in committee business. The motion is in order. Debate. Mr. Green, anything to say?
I think the motion is self-explanatory.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah. Mr. Barrett, go ahead.
Chair, I think it's important that we recognize that the standing orders of the House allow for chairs of committees to use their prerogative to call meetings when necessary and within the mandate of the committee. I think that as a opposition chaired committee, that it's incredibly important that this is an accountability committee, and so often we see that. there are members who don't recognize the need for all members, all backbenchers, to hold the government to account. And that term, I mean members on all sides of the House need to make sure that the executive is kept in check. And so when the standing orders have been adopted by the House and allow for the chair of a committee to call a meeting, that the committee not act contrary to those standing orders of the House. It's a power that is used sparingly or rarely, but I think that it's important that it's one that's preserved. And when we look at the work that this committee has done, and you look at the issues that have been in front of this committee, whether it's the $60 million Arrive scam and and a government that says there's nothing to see here, there's no this was necessary in the context of the pandemic, and therefore all expenses were justified, and everyone should move on. It's taken incredible lifts by committee and an awful lot of energy just to get committees to lift this off the ground. And once it's off the ground, we seem to find new information that is revealing to this government's lack of respect or fiduciary responsibility for Canadians. We have $60 million, and on an app that saw massive subcontracting. 30% of those subcontracted fees were for people who did no work on the app, and that is that's not acceptable, especially in the context of Canadians who are struggling to pay their bills and struggling to just get by. And this committee has been seized with on multiple occasions ethical scandals involving the Prime Minister. Again, important work done by this committee, whether it was the Trudeau Report 1, where the Prime Minister was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act, and the not just in one instance, but multiple sections. I think 4 sections of the Act for illegal vacations taken to Billionaire Island, where he was joined by the then president of the Liberal Party, who's now a Liberal MP, was joined by the Labour Minister, and joined by Mr. Pitfield, the gentleman who he just relieved of a real estate burden at taxpayer expense. That came from the work of this committee, that we were able to expose and challenge the narrative that the government was putting forward. Again, with the Trudeau 2 report, much work was done at this committee. And the ability of the chair to call meetings outside of the regularly scheduled slots is sometimes necessary in order to fulfill our mandate. In that case, it was the Conflict of Interest Act again, and it was the Prime Minister who was found to have interfered in the criminal prosecution of SNC Lavalin, a firm that had illegally funded the Liberal Party of Canada, but also was found guilty of bribing Libyan officials in the Gaddafi regime to the tune of $48 million, defrauding the Libyan people of more than $100 million. And we saw related, of course, to the Prime Minister, but the Trudeau 3 report, where another member of the Prime Minister's cabinet in that case, his then Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act. These are part of these issues are part of the work of this committee. And the $1 billion Green Slush Fund, because we're not duplicating the work of other committees, it's being addressed at the Industry Committee, but has also seen hearings here and government operations, I think public accounts. But this was important for this committee to introduce, examine, and then for the committee to get ultimately got housed elsewhere. But when important issues come forward, the committee needs to be able to do its work. And that's what the standing orders allow for. It's not infrequent that we find ourselves dealing with issues that touch on members of the executive and their obligations having been breached, and what that looks like in terms of the erosion of Canadians' confidence in our public institutions. The president of the King's Privy Council was found, Minister LeBlanc, was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act and claims scam. It was lucrative contracts that went to a family member of the minister's spouse. Again, work that's not part of the scheduled work plan, but needs to be part of the consideration for when the chair exercises his role in calling meetings. But Minister LeBlanc was found guilty of breaking the act in that case, not part of our regular work plan. I mentioned previously former Liberal Finance Minister Bill Morneau, sometimes referred to as Bill No More, having broken the Conflict of Interest Code and the Conflict of Interest Act. And the code violation was, of course, the forgotten French villa. Who among us hasn't forgotten to declare their French villa? And with respect to the scandal, the WE scandal involving the $1 billion Canada Student Service grant going to Justin Trudeau's buddies, the Kielburgers, Bill Morneau was found guilty of breaking the act 3 times for his private interests and failing to recuse himself from decisions relating to the WE organization. And I should circle back to Minister LeBlanc, because we hear from, as part of the mandate of this committee, the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. Now, when the Commissioner Dion resigned and his role wasn't filled, the government, of course, appointed an interim commissioner. And that interim commissioner was the sister-in-law of the minister, and Minister LeBlanc. That's part of our role, is to hold the government accountable, because the appearance of a conflict can be as damaging as a real conflict. And for the appointee and the minister to say, oh, well, we weren't involved in the decision, but what does it look like to the public? And that's what we talk about here, and that's what we examine here at this committee. Of course, when we have the regular work plan for the committee, the regular sitting calendar for the committee. Sometimes we're able to insert items into that. Sometimes we have meetings that are called pursuant to Standing Order 1064, where we can deal with an issue. But we also had the issue of Trade Minister, Liberal Trade Minister Mary Ng, who was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act, Sections 6, Section 21, and this was when she gave her best friend, Amanda Alvaro, contracts worth tens of thousands of dollars, not tendered, but just she had a comfortable relationship with a Liberal insider, a former Liberal staffer, and thought, you know what, this is the right fit for me. She was unconcerned about the not just the appearance, but also the reality of that for taxpayers. Would she have spent tens of thousands of dollars on that service if it wasn't to her friend? Would Canadians have been on the hook for that expense when she already had ministry staff and member staff to fulfill that function? We had and it's interesting now because the Speaker is an elected Liberal member, but he was then the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and Parliamentary Secretary to President of the Treasury Board, and he was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act, using his position to try and influence the CRTC, and to the benefit of a personal interest of his. This is something that is important. I mean, the now Speaker, the then Liberal Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Fergus, was a member of this committee. But once you have that role, once you swear that oath, it's the responsibility of all parliamentarians to make sure that accountability function is being exercised, because it's what Canadians expect. And the standing orders allow for chairs, not just of opposition-chaired committees, but of government-chaired committees as well, to do certain things, to bring a meeting, to schedule a meeting, to call the meeting to order, to suspend the meeting, to adjourn the meeting, and to respond to those 1064, Standing Order 1064 meeting requests. And we see government chairs and opposition chairs have employed all of those powers to call meetings outside of the regular time. We know that there have been instances where it's been essential that this committee step up and respond to something that's in the public interest at that time, and to examine the issue. And sometimes where there's smoke, the fire's gone out, but sometimes we find out that where there's smoke, there's actually an inferno. And that is very often the case. And I would be uncomfortable to abdicate my responsibility as an opposition member to not have the tools in the toolbox available, and for the chair to call a meeting, and for me not to be there or have someone there in my place. I don't want to presuppose what the next 90 days are going to bring, because I don't know. And every time I think that there's going to be nothing that touches the mandate of this committee during a recess period, we find we find ourselves unpleasantly disappointed to see that we have to come back and deal with an issue that has cropped up with, and the appearance of a conflict can even rise to that test. We saw an example of that. We saw an example of that over January, where the Prime Minister ended up taking another one of his vacations at a luxury resort, and did so. Yes, there was great expense to taxpayers for the Prime Minister's security, but it was also a gift, and the stay at this luxury resort. But what does that look like to Canadians when someone who's involved in the Trudeau Foundation, which of course is an issue that we've examined at this committee, and the Trudeau Foundation's many ties to the government? This is a Trudeau Foundation booster or member who's giving the Prime Minister a substantial gift. We need to be able to exercise our mandate, and so I'm not comfortable with the limiting of. I'm not comfortable with the limiting of powers that are afforded under the standing orders. I'm not actually sure that that by motion at committee that we can do that. I would be interested to hear from someone from the law clerk's office if there is any precedence for committees limiting powers that are given under the standing orders. We can pass whatever motions that we want, but what is the effect? What is the force of that motion? So I'm not comfortable with this, and I'm curious if there's any nuance that's available, because we've just had a case that demonstrates why it may be necessary to have meetings, and that's the hearings with Ms. Poon and Mr. Anderson with respect to Liberal Minister Randy Boissonneau's involvement with those two companies and the questions that have come up about that. And that's pushed our agenda now into July. And so it's important that we keep all of the tools that are available to us in the toolbox. I think it's an open question whether or not this is a power that the committee has to limit powers that are given under the standing orders. So I'll take a look at the motion. Listen to what the other members have to say, if anyone else has anything to say about it, and but just at first blush, I'm just based on the important work that we have done, the work that we can do. I don't think that I'm comfortable supporting this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I have a list. The list includes Mr. Brock, next Cooper, Ms. Damoff, Mr. Green, suivi par Monsieur Villemure. Mr. Brock, you have the floor on the motion. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Barrett, for his thorough review and rationale as to why he personally has concerns with limiting the ability of this committee to do its important work. And at first blush, I really don't need time to review the content of my colleague, Mr. Green's motion, because I'm certainly not in favor of that. we have to take a step back from time to time and remind ourselves why we're here. And we're here because Canadians in our constituencies voted to put us here, to be their voice, to do the necessary work, not only within our communities, but also here in the nation's capital. And we're all privileged to be on this particular committee, one of the most important committees that government operations have, because we are in the position to study the actions of others and to determine whether or not laws have been broken. And Canadians expect us to do the work year-round. They certainly understand the necessity of having personal time with our families. And when you take a look at the actual parliamentary calendar, we have an abundant amount of time to spend not only with our families, but with our constituents. In fact, it's a running sort of point of contention between myself and my spouse, who quite often is supportive of the work that I do here on the Hill, but misses the old Larry Brock, where although he could be busy throughout the day in courts, you miss him too? Thank you. She and my children had comfort in knowing that I would return to the house in the evening and wake up in the house in the morning. It is a difficult task being a parliamentarian, and we probably all have similar stories with our respective families. It's an ebb and it's a flow, and there are good times and there are bad times, but ultimately the job entails us to be away at significant points of time. But when you look at the entire calendar, and this is how I justify it to my spouse, quite often goes in one ear and out the other, but I think she listens to it and understands the rationale. I'm actually working here in Ottawa less than I was actually inside a courtroom. We have a very generous summer break. We have an extremely generous Christmas break. We are off at Thanksgiving. We are off at March break, often 2 weeks at a time. We are off during the May holidays. So when you take a look at the actual amount of time we are here doing the work of parliamentarians, it really begs the question that the Canadians don't have that same sort of privileges that we have. They're working largely through the entire year, and depending on the nature of their employment, they might be able to secure 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks of summer holidays throughout the entire year, the usual statutory holidays throughout the year. Parliamentarians are different. So when I take a look at the nature of this motion, what message am I communicating with my constituents that my 2.5 months of summer vacation is more important to me and to my family than doing the work of parliamentarians here in Ottawa, particularly when we've got dark clouds of unethical, scandalous, and corrupt behavior by this government. There was a point in time in the last 6 or 7 months where I often remarked, pretty much every other week or so, another scandal erupts from this government. But lately, it's almost on a daily basis. There are nuances that are coming out of scandals that we have been studying in numerous committees. And I just read a recent report in one of the nationals that made the conclusion, or drew the conclusion that I totally agree with, that unfortunately this is just the tip of the iceberg at the level of this corruption in the Justin Trudeau government. So I can well imagine, without even taking a straw poll of constituents in my riding, if I said my 2.5 months trumps the purpose by which you sent me to Ottawa, they would be appalled at that. And I think as adults and as parliamentarians, we can talk and walk, we can chew and walk, chew gum and walk at the same time, is what I'm trying to say. We can spend the quality time that we need with our families. We can spend the quality time that we need in our constituencies, but we can come back from time to time to do the important work of this committee to get to the bottom of these scandals. I'm not saying that we're going to complete this, Mr. Chair, by the end of the summer, but by completely shutting off our ability to conduct work unless it's an emergency under 106.4, I think misses the point. And as I've indicated, I have been party to a number of committees where I've been parachuted in to examine the multitude of scandals. And let's face it, even on the SNC Lavalin scandal, okay, we haven't even got to the bottom of that yet. We had the RCMP commissioner, and I can't remember the actual date, but I believe it was this committee, before I was a permanent member of this committee. We invited the RCMP commissioner to attend, and it didn't meet the agenda of the Liberal Party of Canada. It didn't meet the agenda of the members opposite to me. And I seem to recall that it may have been even on a break week, because this committee has sat on a number of occasions during break weeks. And I remember the RCMP commissioner, before he even had a chance to give his opening statement, a motion to adjourn was brought by a Liberal member, and it was granted, because it didn't fit with their narrative. And their narrative has been, literally since Justin Trudeau took government, is there's nothing to see here. Absolutely nothing to see here. We've made mistakes. We've offered partial apologies. But trust us when we say there's nothing to see here. I can't accept that. And I know my colleagues on this side of the room can't accept that either. On the SNC matter, lingering questions. And I know that I'm going to have the ability, hopefully, at some point today, depending on the length of time by which we are voting this afternoon, to try to try to close the circle and deal with the hanging threads with the RCMP commissioner, who's coming to public accounts for 2 hours. And I know he had testified here earlier, but there were a number of outstanding questions that were not answered satisfactorily. For instance, why did it take literally 5 years for the RCMP to conclude that there was no probable case to charge Justin Trudeau with obstruction of justice? And the convoluted way that they tried to demonstrate the inability to close out their investigation from a former prosecutor's perspective, it was challenging to truly appreciate what they were saying. There was a changing narrative with respect to their onus. They were conflating their onus with the Crown onus in terms of producing evidence to convince a trier of fact of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That has been and never will be the prerogative of police agencies. Their sole mandate, which is an extremely low standard, is there reasonable and probable grounds? For instance, is there reasonable and probable grounds to believe Justin Trudeau should be charged with the criminal offense of obstruction of justice? There are two facets to the prosecution of obstruction of justice. One is, what is the actus reus? What is the actus reus? What did he do to obstruct justice? And I think the evidence is abundantly clear. It's unchallenged. It's confirmed in the report by former Commissioner Dion that he had a political agenda. And he knew that there was a tool available to his then first Indigenous female Attorney General, Minister of Justice, to intervene in the decision made by the Director of Public Prosecutions not to offer SNC Lavalin, who is facing corruption and bribery charges, very serious charges in this country for which, upon conviction, could have landed executives serving a prison sentence. He wanted Jody Wilson-Raybould to deviate from her prosecutorial independence and intervene in that decision to offer the deferred prosecution agreement. This was in September of 2017. And for those who remember, and I know that my colleague, Mr. Cooper, actually had the privilege of questioning Jody Wilson-Raybould at committee, and that was followed up with her writing a book. I have read that cover to cover. And it's appalling at the lengths by which our Prime Minister crossed the line between interference, obstruction, and allowing her to exercise her independence. She made it abundantly clear to him during that first meeting. That first meeting in September, for those who have read the book, and she may have highlighted this in her testimony, was to discuss a number of other issues, particularly her priorities as it relates to Indigenous matters. Justin Trudeau came into that meeting red hot. He had no intention of discussing any other issue, particularly Indigenous issues, other than SNC Lavalin. He reminded her of a couple of things. He reminded her of a pending provincial election in Quebec that he felt would be very problematic if this multinational corporation was still subject to criminal prosecution in Canada. And more importantly, and damning, I would suggest, he reminded Jody Wilson-Raybould that he was the member for Papineau, the riding by which SNC had its headquarters. And when Jody said, "Are you asking me to make a decision contrary to a decision I already made? Are you interfering in my decision?" For any impartial observer of what took place during that discussion, the proverbial fly in the wall, you would conclude absolutely the Prime Minister of a G7 nation preferred the interests of a corrupt corporation and wanted his Attorney General, who wore two hats, which begs the question about the utility of a two-hat minister moving forward. He wanted her to make that decision in his favor and in the favor of SNC. He backed off, of course, and said, oh, no, of course, that decision is yours. But the damage was done. That was the actus reus. That was the act by which he, then followed by PMO staff, then followed by ministerial staff in other departments, ultimately concluding with former Privy Council clerk Michael Warnock, unknown to him, being audio taped in that fateful telephone meeting, I should say, in December of 2017. Commissioner Dion clearly articulates and outlines all of the attempts to interfere in her decision-making. Jody Wilson-Raybould truly demonstrated the integrity that you'd expect from an attorney general who probably felt immense pressure as a member of the Justin Trudeau cabinet. She was mindful of her dual role, and she held firm. Michael Warnock came into that meeting, again, red hot. The purpose, according to Jody Wilson-Raybould, was to discuss, again, other issues. Those other issues were never discussed. Michael Warnock came in hot and made it known to Jody Wilson-Raybould on more than one occasion that the Prime Minister was adamant about this. Now, why is that term adamant important? For the lawyers in this committee, you'll remark, for those who practice criminal law, about the second aspect of prosecutions. We talked about the actus reus. Now we have the mens rea, and that is the intent. And the obstruction of justice is a specific intent offense. So when Michael Warnock comes in to this meeting red hot and references the Prime Minister on more than one occasion being adamant that he is going to find a solution one way or another, is indicative of intent. That is the only plausible legal definition of what